Racists sabotaged Miles Davis's car after his concert. What happened next exposed the deadly reality of racial terrorism in 1970s America. The attack was planned meticulously, cut brake lines, loosened wheel bolts, and a steering mechanism that would fail on the first turn. The goal was simple: kill Miles Davis for daring to perform for integrated audiences in the Deep South. But when Miles inexplicably decided to walk back to his hotel instead of taking his car, his driver James Washington volunteered to drive the vehicle back. The racist sabotage worked exactly as planned, except it killed the wrong black man. James died so racists could send a message that was never received by its intended target. It was October 23, 1971, and Birmingham, Alabama was a city still seething with racial hatred, 16 years after the Montgomery bus boycott, and 8 years after the violent confrontations that had made Birmingham synonymous with racist terrorism. Miles Davis was performing at the Municipal Auditorium as part of a tour that was deliberately challenging segregation by insisting on integrated audiences in venues across the Deep South. The Birmingham that Miles encountered in 1971 was a city caught between its violent past and an uncertain future. While legal segregation had ended, the social and economic structures that supported white supremacy remained largely intact. Many white residents viewed integrated entertainment events as direct attacks on their way of life, and some were prepared to respond with violence. Miles's decision to perform in Birmingham was controversial even within the music industry. His management had advised against it, warning that the combination of his outspoken political views, his interracial band, and his insistence on integrated audiences made him a target for extremist violence. But Miles had refused to be intimidated. "Music doesn't have color," Miles had said at a press conference earlier that week. "Anyone who wants to hear it should be able to hear it. I'm not going to let racists decide where I can and can't play." The concert itself had been extraordinary. Despite threats of protests and boycotts, the Municipal Auditorium was packed with a genuinely integrated audience. Black and white music fans sat together, united by their appreciation for Miles's revolutionary electric fusion sound. For 2 hours, the auditorium became what Birmingham could be, a place where racial barriers dissolved in the face of artistic excellence. But outside the venue, a different Birmingham was planning its response. The terrorist cell that planned the attack on Miles Davis consisted of 5 white men connected to both the Ku Klux Klan and more militant white supremacist organizations. Their leader, Robert "Bobby" Clayton, was a 38-year-old auto mechanic who had learned his trade in the Army and now used those skills to maintain vehicles for local Klan members. The other 4 men, Jerry Hawkins, Tommy Burke, David Mills, and Steve Norton, were unemployed factory workers who blamed their economic problems on civil rights progress. For weeks, they had been planning what they called Operation Silencer, a plan to assassinate Miles Davis during his Birmingham performance. They had studied his tour schedule, observed his security arrangements, and identified what they saw as his greatest vulnerability: his habit of leaving venues in the same car with minimal security. Their plan was sophisticated and deadly. During the concert, while venue security was focused on the audience and the stage, Bobby Clayton would slip into the parking area behind the Municipal Auditorium and sabotage Miles's car in 3 different ways. First, he would cut the brake lines just enough that they would fail after a few stops, causing what would appear to be an accident. Second, he would loosen the lug nuts on both front wheels, ensuring that the wheels would come off during the first sharp turn. Finally, he would damage the steering mechanism so that the driver would lose control even if the brakes and wheels held. The goal was to create what investigators would conclude was a tragic accident, a mechanical failure that killed the famous jazz musician on his way back to his hotel. The racist message would be clear to anyone who understood. Black entertainers who challenged segregation in the Deep South did so at their own risk. At 9:45 p.m., as Miles was finishing his second encore, Bobby Clayton made his way to the rear parking area of the Municipal Auditorium. Miles's black 1971 Cadillac Eldorado was parked exactly where his intelligence had indicated it would be, in a reserved space near the stage door with minimal lighting and no security presence. Working quickly and quietly, Clayton executed his sabotage plan. He crawled under the vehicle and used wire cutters to partially sever the brake lines, leaving just enough metal intact that the lines would hold until the first few applications of the brakes. He then loosened the lug nuts on both front wheels, turning them just enough that they would hold under normal driving but fail under the stress of braking or turning. Finally, he damaged the steering linkage, creating a weakness that would cause complete steering failure at the worst possible moment. The entire sabotage operation took less than 15 minutes. By 10:05 p.m., Clayton was back with his conspirators, waiting to hear news of Miles Davis's death. Inside the auditorium, Miles was experiencing one of those magical musical moments that made all the risks worthwhile. The integrated audience was responding to his music with an enthusiasm and appreciation that transcended racial boundaries. Black and white fans were on their feet together, united in their recognition of artistic genius. But even as Miles was enjoying the musical triumph, he was feeling increasingly uneasy about something he couldn't identify. As a musician, he had learned to trust his instincts about subtleties that others might miss. The slight change in a band member's timing that indicated fatigue, the shift in an audience's energy that signaled restlessness, the feeling that something in the musical environment wasn't quite right. As he left the stage after his final encore, that same intuitive unease was growing stronger. Something about the evening felt off, though he couldn't identify what. Miles's driver for the Birmingham leg of the tour was James Washington, a 34-year-old local musician who supplemented his income by providing transportation services for visiting entertainers. James was a talented keyboard player who had grown up in Birmingham's black musical community and dreamed of eventually moving to New York or Los Angeles to pursue a full-time music career. James had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, and was using the money from driving for touring musicians to save for the family's eventual relocation to a city with more musical opportunities. He was scheduled to drive for several more acts over the coming months, building toward what he hoped would be enough savings to make the move by the following summer. When Miles emerged from the stage door at 10:20 p.m., James was waiting by the Cadillac as planned. But Miles, still feeling that unexplainable unease, made a decision that would save his life and end James's. "James," Miles said, "I think I'm going to walk back to the hotel tonight. Clear my head, you know. You can take the car back and I'll see you in the morning." James looked surprised. "You sure, Mr. Davis? It's about a mile, and it's not the safest neighborhood for walking at night." "I need the air," Miles said. "Sometimes after a good show, I need to walk and think about the music. You understand?" James nodded. As a musician himself, he understood the need to decompress after a powerful performance. "No problem, Mr. Davis. I'll take the car back to the hotel and make sure it's ready for tomorrow." Miles handed James a $20 tip. "Thanks for understanding. See you in the morning." As Miles began walking toward downtown Birmingham, James got into the sabotaged Cadillac and started the engine. Everything seemed normal as he pulled out of the parking lot and onto the street. The racist sabotage began to take effect almost immediately, though James didn't realize what was happening. As he applied the brakes at the first stop sign, the partially cut brake lines weakened further. By the second stop sign, the brake response was noticeably softer, but James attributed this to the unfamiliarity of driving a different car. 3 blocks from the auditorium, James approached the intersection of 16th Street and 6th Avenue, where he needed to make a left turn toward the hotel. As he began the turn, several catastrophic failures occurred simultaneously. The damaged brake lines finally separated completely, leaving James with no stopping power. The loosened lug nuts on the front wheels chose that moment to fail, causing both front wheels to separate from the vehicle. The compromised steering mechanism snapped, leaving James unable to control the direction of the now wheelless, brakeless car. The Cadillac careened across the intersection, struck a utility pole, and burst into flames. James Washington died instantly in the crash that was designed to kill Miles Davis. Miles was 6 blocks away, walking through downtown Birmingham and thinking about the evening's music when he heard the sirens. Police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances were racing toward the area near the auditorium, and Miles felt a growing sense of dread that he couldn't explain. When he reached his hotel 20 minutes later, The desk clerk was waiting with devastating news. "Mr. Davis, there's been a terrible accident. Your driver, Mr. Washington, was killed in a car crash just blocks from the auditorium. Your car was completely destroyed." Miles felt the world tilt around him. The unease he'd been feeling all evening suddenly made horrible sense. His inexplicable decision to walk instead of ride had saved his life, but it had sent an innocent man to his death. The Birmingham Police Department's investigation into the crash was cursory and concluded within 48 hours. Detective Ray Morrison, who led the investigation, determined that the crash was caused by mechanical failure of unknown origin and closed the case. No mention was made of the fact that multiple systems had failed simultaneously, or that such a pattern was virtually impossible without deliberate sabotage. The lack of a thorough investigation was not accidental. Detective Morrison was himself a Klan sympathizer who saw the death of any black man associated with race mixing as a positive outcome. He had no interest in discovering evidence that might lead to the arrest of white supremacists who were doing what he considered to be necessary work. Miles, devastated by James's death and suspicious about the circumstances, hired his own investigator. Within a week, the private investigator had discovered evidence of sabotage that the Birmingham police had either missed or ignored. Cut brake lines, loosened wheel bolts, and damaged steering components all pointed to deliberate terrorism. But even with evidence of sabotage, no arrests were ever made. The FBI, when contacted about potential civil rights violations, showed little interest in investigating the death of a black man who wasn't a nationally known civil rights figure. James Washington was dismissed as collateral damage, not worthy of federal attention. For Bobby Clayton and his conspirators, the bombing was both a success and a failure. They had successfully demonstrated their ability to kill black men who challenged segregation, but they had failed to kill their primary target. Miles Davis was still alive, still performing for integrated audiences, still challenging the racial order they were trying to preserve. More importantly, they had created a martyr. James Washington's death became a rallying point for Birmingham's black community, who understood that a good man had been murdered for the crime of working for a musician who believed in racial equality. Miles never performed in Birmingham again. But James Washington's death changed him in ways that influenced the rest of his career. The guilt of surviving when an innocent man died in his place became a driving force behind Miles's increasingly outspoken support for civil rights causes. Miles also began traveling with additional security and varying his routines to make himself a more difficult target. But the psychological impact of James's death was permanent. For the rest of his life, Miles carried the weight of knowing that his decision to walk instead of ride had saved him and killed someone else. In interviews years later, Miles would often mention James Washington as an example of the human cost of racism. "James died because racists wanted to kill me," Miles would say. "He had nothing to do with their politics or their hatred. He was just trying to make a living and support his family, but to them, any black man would do." Miles established a scholarship fund for James Washington's children, ensuring that all three would be able to attend college. He also made annual contributions to James's widow Sarah until her death in 1995. But no amount of money could ease the guilt Miles felt about the randomness of survival and death. The case of James Washington's murder was officially reopened in 2001 as part of a federal effort to investigate unsolved civil rights-era killings. By then, however, most of the conspirators were dead. Bobby Clayton had died in a workplace accident in 1987, taking the details of the sabotage plot to his grave. In 2003, investigators were able to identify and interview Jerry Hawkins, the last surviving member of the terrorist cell. Facing prosecution for federal civil rights violations, Hawkins confessed to his role in planning the attack on Miles Davis's car. He confirmed that the group had intended to kill Miles but expressed no remorse for James Washington's death. "We were at war," Hawkins said during his confession. "In war, there are casualties. We didn't care which one of them died, as long as one of them did." Hawkins was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for civil rights violations. He died in custody in 2006, unrepentant to the end. The story of James Washington's death stands as a reminder of the deadly reality of racial terrorism in America and the way that racist violence often claims unintended victims. James was not a civil rights leader or a political activist. He was a working musician and father who died because racists saw all black men as interchangeable targets. For Miles Davis, James Washington's death was a permanent reminder that artistic success and public recognition could not protect black Americans from the violence of white supremacy. The guilt of survival and the responsibility of speaking for those who could not speak for themselves became defining themes of Miles's later career. If this story of racial terrorism, survival guilt, and the human cost of hatred moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand that racism doesn't just target famous people, it destroys innocent lives. Have you ever experienced survivor's guilt or felt responsible for someone else's suffering? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to check out more stories about the price of standing against hatred and the weight of undeserved survival.